And I want to start by saying, obviously, this is a wide topic, and there's no way to cover every possible branch of this topic of composition pedagogy. So I'm just going to give my perspective as a student myself or a developing composer myself, and then how the way that I learned influenced my teaching, and what I have learned from teaching students, what I find the challenges are, what I like to try to help students understand, and then I just want anyone else to chime in with their own thoughts. So I thought I'd start by talking about my own path to composing, and I really have come to appreciate how, as composers, everything from our birth is our influences. So we don't just, people ask, who are your influences as a composer? And then the expected answer is sort of a list of other composer names, but there's a lot more that goes into it. And so I started out as my father was an organist, and in the school that I attended, we sang every day. We didn't have music education class. We were not taught to read music, but I had taught myself to read music just by looking at music and singing. And when I was 5, my parents had a piano. It was an old free piano someone gave them. They both played. My mother played piano quite well. My dad really preferred the organ. And but they didn't believe that I should become a musician. That was just completely out of the question. So my mother showed me where middle C was on the staff and the keyboard, and then I taught myself to read music from there. And they had a pile of music. So by the time I was 6, I was playing these chorales out of the hymnal that they had. I would look and find, I kind of had this own graduated system of, finding, going more and more difficult. And then when I got bored, I would turn them upside down and play them backwards. And I didn't know what retrograde was, and I didn't know what inversion was. And I was playing from ear by ear at a really young age. So improvising and playing by ear was just a natural. I just thought everyone did this, right? And I started playing trumpet when I was 10 and played and was very serious about it and practiced like crazy. And I was able to get free lessons at the school I was attending. I played in wind ensembles, and I later played in student orchestras, or actually in the Milwaukee Symphony Youth Orchestra, which was half symphony players and half students. And there are only 2 trumpet players, students. So that was a great experience. And the wind ensemble I played in was a really top ensemble for high school, and we played all the best repertoire. So that was all feeding into me. But by the time I was in high school, I knew that I wanted to be a composer. And I mean, I was teaching myself all this piano music. So with no teacher, I was playing Chopin and Bach and Beethoven and Saint-Saëns, like from these books that my mother had. And then when I could earn my own money at 16, I started buying music and entering competitions. And still my parents like, no, you should not be a musician. and I did it anyway. And so I just knew I wanted to study composition. So I go off to the university, but how do you become a composer, right? I thought that I had to learn everything there was to know about music and music theory, and then I would know how to compose. So I started out, I auditioned on piano. I was accepted as a piano major. My first lesson was with my piano professor. And then I told him that I wanted to study composition. I brought this little piece that I had composed. I was like a young composer. You have an idea, but then how do you develop it? So I didn't know how to do that, and I didn't have enough confidence just to do it. So I showed him this piece, and this was not pop music. There was no way I would call this pop music. And he looked at it, but it was tonal. And he said to me, "Oh, do you want to be a pop music composer?" And I said, I was really insulted. So I stopped bringing him stuff. But he actually he was supportive, and he bought me and gave to me Schoenberg's Studies on Harmony. I have it sitting right here. Anyway, he said, "Oh, you should study this." And then he told me himself, he said, I just regret that I didn't ever compose. His name was Armand Basile, and he was a concert pianist, and he had taught at Eastman before he came to Milwaukee, was where I was studying. And I think, in hindsight, because he played Rachmaninoff, he played lots of Brahms, he played Liszt, he was a big romantic pianist. He didn't do new music. That was not his thing. And I think that he had this inclination to compose, that everybody who's a composer knows how that feels. But at that time, the pressure to compose serial and atonal music was so strong that if you didn't do it, you weren't serious. So I'm going into the university, and this is also what I'm being told, is that if you want to be a composer, you have to compose serial music or atonal music. And I was rebellious about this. Like, I was sitting in my classes as a freshman music history student, and my professor is saying to me, well, or to the class, students are going to be, or children are going to be humming atonal melodies just naturally.
Dawn, a quick question. The Schoenberg book that he gave you, was that Structural Functions of Harmony? Or was it
Yes.
the Harmony of Era?
Let's see. It was the Structural
Yeah,
Functions of Harmony.
yeah. I mean, just the first few pages of that made a big impression on me, actually. The way he describes how chords lead from one to the next.
Right, the
It was
voice
stuff that
leading.
I had never heard before that. Anyway, please go on. Sorry.
Yeah, right. No, and the thing, like in my music theory classes, my harmony, I passed out of the first year of theory, so I go right into harmony. And the guy who was teaching was a really nice guy, but he was a graduate student with no teaching experience. And we were using Piston, and he would just like talk to the board. And I quickly realized I better really study this book. Like, that's the only way I'm going to learn anything about theory. And I just remember from Piston just like Roman numerals and not learning how the horizontal connection at all. And so I ended up then, and I just rejected this pressure. It was like, that was some kids, they rebel by going on drugs. And I rebelled by saying, I am not going to compose atonal music. I'm not going to do it. But then that drive to compose was always there. So then because my parents did not want me to study music, so I was completely self-sufficient financially. From age 18, I had to support myself. So, and looking back, even that, what I was doing, that all played a part in my becoming a composer and how I thought about it. I started playing for the Milwaukee Ballet, and I had to improvise. And I also was exposed to a ton of rep that I had to find all this rep to play for the classes. And I also played for company. And so and then teaching children, that was what's so interesting to me, is that I recognized that they were drawn to classics the same way that I had been when I was teaching myself. So I'm asking myself, how is this? Like, how do they know that this is really a classic piece? They don't know who this composer is, and they like this, And so I realized, okay, it's the, at the time, I really couldn't analyze, like, what is it about this music that makes it so last and draw people, over centuries. And in hindsight, it's the structure, it's where this balance of unity or of variety and surprise and all of that. And for me, melody was always a big draw, and so I ended up finishing my undergrad in, I dropped trumpet. I had started out as a trumpet major, and piano, and I dropped trumpet, switched to voice because I loved foreign languages, and then discovered opera, and mostly art song was what I really loved, but I still wanted to be a composer. Then I transferred schools. I moved to Texas, a long story why, but at that point, I could have then finished my degree in composition with Joseph Pacalis, his name was, at the University of Texas, El Paso. And he won a Pulitzer Prize. Like, he was a fine composer, but I think I still had this fear, you're going to be pushed into composing things you don't want to compose. And I was very much loved performing too, and I didn't want to let that go. So I just finished my degree in voice performance at the time. And then I went to Germany, and again, like I studied piano there, I studied voice there, I worked, and for a long time I was a single parent of 2 little children, so there was no time for composing. But this idea is like, I am really a composer who does a lot of performing, and I have never studied composition, but this is just, I know that this is my strongest thing, but I haven't developed it yet. So finally, towards the end, after 9 years in Germany, I was looking around at what's going on in the US through the internet that had just kind of opened up to me. And I'm seeing that the climate has changed in the US to where in academic institutions, it's more acceptable to not compose serial music. Like, that's not the only thing in every institution. Whereas in Germany, it still was. And that was one of the reasons I decided to move back to the US, because I really almost became a German citizen. And but I felt like I was just gonna kind of not be able to do what I wanted to do. And so now I went, at that point when I made that move, I was like, I am going to start composing now. And I was in my late 30s by then. And so I ended up in Columbus, Ohio. And at Ohio State, I went to the composition department and I asked them, can I, I'm interested in studying composition, and they wanted me to repeat a bachelor's degree. And I already had a master's degree in piano performance and in voice performance. And I just said, no. I tried one class and the students were just so below what I was, where I was musically. I just said, I'm not going to do this. So I studied choral conducting. And again, I have to say, like, that was really, really good training for me as a composer. is studying conducting. And then finally, towards the end of my choral studies, I finally then composed a couple choral pieces. By this time I'm like, well, who's going to believe me if I say I want to compose? Like, who's going to look at? And I had a bad experience when I was younger where I had composed this art song that is perfectly good. Like, it's been performed now, and I was maybe 20 when I composed it. I gave it to a professional singer, and she just dismissed it, would not even look at it. And so I was really apprehensive, and I think there is a gender issue here with you have no female models, you have nobody encouraging you, so I finally I gave these choral pieces to my professor, and she immediately programmed them and put them on recordings. So at that point, I said, okay, when I do my doctorate, I don't have an undergraduate or a graduate degree in composition. I want to study composition. How can I do this? So I turned down assistantships for conducting. Like, I went around and I auditioned at all these places. I was gonna, start with, I wanted to go somewhere where I could do composition as a secondary area at least. So I auditioned out here in Washington. I got in, but there was really not an option for secondary and composition. I auditioned at Illinois and got a really, really wonderful offer there for conducting. But I knew that school, their composition, I would not have been able to compose the way I wanted to. So I had the option of, at University of Minnesota, I auditioned there really late, but I auditioned on voice, and I was able to do composition in the secondary area. And so I took it, and I brought some stuff, these few choral pieces and art songs, to the composition head, Alex Lubit, and he looked at it and he said, yep, you can study this as a secondary area. And then in my first lessons with him, we decided I was going to compose a string trio. I'd never composed for strings. And he then, I did a theme and variations, and I had finished like a couple of them, and he said to me, do you want to switch your major to composition, because I will accept you? And I sort of regret that I didn't say yes. I was in the DMA program, and the composition major was PhD, and I would have just needed to add one more year. And I was so desperate to not be in school anymore. I asked him, I said, well, what's the difference? And he just said, well, it's just, the dissertation. But the DMA, I could still do a thesis that was, composition. So that's what I ended up doing. And his style, so here he was the first really composition teacher I had. And so he, basically we would just decide, okay, what do you want to work on and what project? And then I would bring him stuff and he would look at it. And if I got stuck on something like with the string writing, he was really great at finding examples, from Bach solo works for string players. When I said, like, I'm not sure, Candace, what all I could do with these strings. And so he told me himself, because I told him, I said, the reason I have never studied composition yet is because I was told I had to compose atonal music and I wouldn't do it. And he said, well, when I was a student at University of Iowa, and he was doing his doctorate. And he had come from a background he had been like a rock guitar player, and he worked really, really hard to learn to read music. And then he said, so he was in that program, and it was very much hardcore, serial atonal. And he said, one day I woke up and he said, I'm not doing this anymore. And I don't know, like, I guess he was still a student, and his music is really, really, really interesting. It's he's a guitarist, and it's very interesting. He does a lot with just kind of I don't know how to describe it. I wish I could. Right now I'm too tired. But anyway, he was so open and so encouraging that gave me a ton of freedom. So, I composed a ton of music while I was doing my doctorate. And then, and my first teaching job at Hiram College, I was hired for theory composition, not for voice. I ended up also conducting the choir there because I had a ton of choral conducting experience and a master's degree. And I did a secondary area in choral conducting for my doctorate as well. But I really loved teaching theory, actually. From a composer's perspective, I didn't have many composition students, but I had, for those 10 years, I had, kind of a steady every year, a few. And so now I'm trying to, as a composition, instructor, I'm getting students who have, with a wide variety of backgrounds. I forgot to mention that I also studied composition in Paris. I have to talk about that a little bit before I talk about Hiram, because that did also, what it actually did was made me realize that all of this sort of autodidactic training that I had, performing, and I had also really, really studied theory when I was an undergrad, because I was thought I had to learn it all before I could ever compose. So I studied for 2 summers at this program called the European American Musical Alliance. And I had heard about it from a friend of mine, Abby Bettinas, who is a choral composer. And once she told me about the program, I thought, I want to do this, So what was so wonderful about that program is that it recognized tonal music as also serious. I mean, there was, and it was all connected, from whatever the level of composing or even the style. It was all connected by the idea of actually a vocal connection and horizontal connection rather than just vertical. And this program was started by former students of Nadia Boulanger. And so it consisted of, and this is the way she taught her students, of counterpoint, all the way from first species to, free counterpoint, and all the way through invertible counterpoint. So from really beginning to advanced. And then score study, which involved, we had 2 pianos. We put the scores up at the 2 pianos. 2 pianists would sit, one would play the brass parts, one would play the string, and all the other instruments, the rest of the class would sing the parts on fixed do. And so you're transposing the parts while you're singing on fixed do. It was a great way to study scores. And then ear training and keyboard harmony was a huge one, with a lot of keyboard sequences, all different kind of sequences to become in all keys, to become facile with transposing and with also with this always with voice leading in mind. So one of the exercises in keyboard harmony was that Philip Lasser was the instructor, and he teaches at Juilliard. And so he would call on a student and he'd say, okay, we're in the key of, E flat. And now we're going to do this sequence, but you're not going to play it. You're going to sing the alto line on fixed do. So you have to really think about the horizontal movement. And then, so you had those parts, and then you had the free composition lessons was, part of it. And every student had to sing in the choir. And that is actually how Nadia Boulanger taught her students. So I did that I did 2 summers of that. And so then when I, started teaching composition, I hadn't really thought about, when you first start teaching, you have these kind of grand ideas about how you're going to impart all this knowledge to the students. And then you have students who, in the smaller colleges, who really can barely read music. And then and what I learned is if a student came to you and said, I want to take composition lessons, that they have a certain kind of creativity that's just driving. And so what I would do is always try to find out, of course, what their background was, and start where they are, and go for, try to get them to understand that they have enough of that they've heard music and they have performed music, and that is a starting point for composing. And at the same time, they need to learn theory, and they need to learn about the grammar of harmony and voicing and acoustics, so that they're not reinventing the physical wheel of music every time they try to compose, and that it's not a linear process necessarily, and that a piece does not have to be a huge masterwork for it to be really valuable, and that composing is never a waste of time, and that if you have that inclination, you should explore it. So that was sort of what I started with. For myself, I found that when I needed to, I derived a lot of inspiration from reading the biographies of other composers. I was at University of Minnesota, Dominic Argento. I don't know if anybody's heard of him, but he was, almost primarily an opera composer. And he left before I got there, but he was still very much known there. Mm-hmm. So I always wanted to know, like, how do other composers think? Like, how do they think? Do I think like a composer? And I would read these books and I would just be like, oh, it would just resonate, even though, I was not as accomplished as they were. But I realized that this feeling that I had always had, that I need to compose, that there's just a certain personality, way of thinking that is, I think, common across the board. So he wrote this book called Catalogue raisonné as memoir, and he just wrote about the different operas that he had composed. There's a chapter for each of them, and it's just so fascinating. And he talks about how he could not compose when anybody else was in the room, including his wife. And I just thought, I am now to the point where I can compose if my husband is in the living room. It took me a long time to get to that point. But those kind of books. So I would also, with my students, I would try to get them to expand their worldview and their to connect by choosing, a composer that they were interested in and really reading about that composer. And also by studying other art forms like visual art and just being inspired by the ideas of contrast and balance. Also in literature. And I have always used a lot of metaphors that work for me, and I don't know that they work for everyone, but of music as language. So a common thing that a lot of beginning composers will do is try to put everything possible into one composition. And I call it the kitchen cupboard method of cooking, where you would just put in every ingredient into this one dish, and then it doesn't really turn out to be anything. So I'll say, like, okay, identify 3 musical ideas, and those are the core, and that's what you're going to, you have plenty of material to work with from that. And of course, also, doing score analysis as an example, like take out the Beethoven Fifth and just show like how just one motif can be developed into a whole symphonic movement. So I'm not, as you can tell by me talking here, I'm not the most linear person. And I have to struggle with that in my teaching, because I'll get students who are very linear. And if I am talking too fast and giving them all these ideas, they'll just be like, wait, I don't understand what you're saying at all. So, but I also have learned to try to assess. Some students are very just intuitive, but not analytical at all. And others are analytical, but no intuition. So I'm always trying to help them
he might
move into an area that
lawmakers on the Hill, are they down with that? Yeah,
moving.
they actually are. Republicans are anyway. Speaker Mike Johnson said today.
Radio.
Everybody put on their mute, please.
Alan, please mute.
That conservatives, especially Russell Vogt, the new OMB director, have been writing about and talking about and wanting about.
The host of the meeting should be able to mute everybody.
Oh, yeah, that's what I'm looking for.
It's under participants.
To get kind of wonky here, it's called the unitary executive theory, and it has been gaining steam over recent years, and that gives president expanded powers over the executive branch. And now the Republicans in Congress are allowing the president.
Alan, please mute.
Here we go.
Discussions over funding.
There we go. Okay. Sorry about that. Anyway, yeah, striking this balance, and I've always taught in, I think, what do they call this? Oh shoot, my mind is going blank. I don't spoon feed, and it's partly I always have to be aware of this because I had to be so independent and teaching myself, and I sometimes I have to say like I don't have patience for like tell me how to do this because I did not have anyone to tell me myself. So, but I still want to support students. So I teach in a really Socratic style, and it's called a flipped. If you're teaching in a classroom, it's flipped classroom where you have to, I will give the students a reading assignment, and I will not talk about it. They have to read it and come up with their own ideas about it, and then they come back and we discuss it rather than I tell them everything that's in the reading assignment and then they take it and then read it. And this, not all students like this because they are used to, I've noticed a huge difference since No Child Left Behind and all the testing, and they have to be, the teachers are under such pressure to have the students succeed on the test that they have to practically tell them what every test question is and drill them the answers so that their school, they don't lose their jobs and their school loses funding. So the students come in, they're not expecting to be told, okay, go learn about this and then we'll discuss it. So that's been a challenge for me as a instructor. Well, I'd be like, okay, we've decided you want to compose a song. So I don't know, I know some background about the student, but I don't then go through and give them a list. Now, first do this and then do this, because I really strongly believe that they will come out with more creativity and more self-confidence if they risk making, that's the thing I always say, you have to know, like, I am not going to criticize what you bring back to me. We're just going to look at how does this work, and I can help you then, and you're going to learn what you already know, rather than I'm not giving you a formula. This is how this is done. I do give like, okay, I'm not a student says I'm having trouble with, I started this piece, but how do I turn it into a piece? Well, then I'll find some examples, of some piece in that form and say, well, you could use this as a model, and imagine that it's like when you're looking at that model, it's like you're going to build your own model. So you're taking this one apart and now you're going to put your own together, and taking it apart helps you understand how it's put together. So the students that I have taught, I've had a few more advanced students, but generally, especially, I taught at Hiram College for 10 years, and then I taught at Gonzaga University for a year. I was teaching theory and composition there. I've also had to teach electronic music, and that is not my specialty. And I thought that I would be so behind the students technology wise, and learned that was not the case. And also found ways like, that was a really interesting experience because I had students who couldn't read music, but made just like fabulous, meaningful, creative works using, different computer programs, and really creative. And so now at Pacific Lutheran, I left my tenured position at Hiram College. I had taken a unpaid sabbatical when I was teaching at Gonzaga, and then I left my tenured position, moved out here I'm in Olympia, Washington, without a job. I needed to move out here, and my husband had found a job. So I wrote to Greg Utes, who was the head of the PLU composition department. I just said, I'm here and I would love to do some teaching. And so he took me on as an adjunct. And then after, when COVID hit, numbers fell, enrollment fell a lot. And so I went from having 4 or 5 students a semester to having 1 or 0 sometimes. And I've been tended to get the students who, not always, but the really beginning students. And that is, to me, more challenging than having an advanced student who's, you know, knows a lot. And on the other hand, the beginning students, you know, what I have routinely found is that they all have this like kernel of creativity that's so interesting to me. And then they don't always have the musical chops yet to easily do what they want to do, but it's there. And I have to try to keep encouraging them and say, look, this will get easier. You just have to keep doing this. You know, like they're first learning how to, they have a rhythm in their head. They don't know how to notate it. And I'm telling them, not only will this get easier, but when you take your training and you have to do dictation, you are going to be so much better through composing and also just for your oral skills. So, you know, there's just tons and tons more to talk about as far as composition pedagogy. I recently found a wonderful book through Oxford University Press on composition pedagogy. I only found it yesterday. I was looking at it. It looks incredible. And I think what is so positive about it is that we moved past the idea that there's only one legitimate and serious style of composing, and that comes from this Western European tradition, and it was going, you know, this is how music is evolving, which that's a whole nother topic, which, you know, I did a lot of study on actually the socio-cultural background in which Schoenberg was living. For example, what was happening in European culture and history. Schoenberg was very closely connected to Freud. He was very into mysticism. He was trying to create music that purposely humans could not easily access. So the problem was that was translated across the ocean in a much different way, I think, when it came to America. And thus this pressure of you must compose this way because it's all going in this direction. And now there is, I think it's necessary because all these students are coming in with only pop music background or whatever. And it's just not right to just say, well, you don't have the right background, so forget it. You know, there's nothing important that you have, you know. So anyway, that book has just tons of wonderful perspectives about different cultural perspectives of music composition and composition pedagogy. And I have to try to order a copy. I can send out. I don't know if they even, if it's widely available for the general public, or I'll find that out. But so I will stop talking here and would be really happy to hear any of your thoughts on all of this.
Dawn, what's the name? What's the author and the name of that book?
I have to write it down.
Okay.
I look it up and send it to you. Yeah, I'm going to make a note. I mean, I was going to do it anyway, because I'm going to call Oxford and see how I can get it.
I mean, you gave it such a great build-up. I expected to hear.
I know, right?
It's fine. It's fine.
Okay.
Do you have a title? Did you give us a title of the
No,
book?
I didn't. I didn't give
Oh.
you a title. I think it was called just composition pedagogy.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Let's see. Yeah. Yeah. I'm curious, Greg, about your long experience teaching.
Well, I was going to say, I know Alex a little bit,
Oh,
so I'm
yeah.
glad to hear you had a chance to work with him. Very
Yeah.
fine composer. I haven't seen him in many years, but we used to meet up at conferences, so I was pleased to hear that. I'd be curious to know did he tell you who he worked with at Iowa?
No, he never said, so I don't know.
Because I worked with Dick Hervig there.
Okay.
And I'm not going to remember the name of a couple of the other people, but Hervig was marvelous teacher. And he taught music, not composition.
Oh, yeah.
And I
Mhm.
think that's an important thing. And that's basically what you've been saying, that you
Yeah.
really, composition is really teaching oneself or being coached and mentored in what music is. What does it do? What is it? And and you can achieve it in many different ways. And I must say, I was very lucky over the course of my career to have teachers that never insisted that I write a certain way. They just kept asking me questions, and if I and and steered me toward pieces I should listen to. As a result of that, I had a couple of courses in Bartok quartets by a gentleman at Michigan State University. And I learned more about composition in a music literature class than I ever could have, and so it goes. And I had other people, and I learned a lot from Hindemith, reading his, can't remember the name of his book. Of course,
Yes,
he has theory books too, but I read
yes,
the book that he wrote about his life as a composer. And
yes.
even Copeland wrote a very, very good book. And you really get a lot of insights. And then, of course, for me, it's going to concerts. And
Yes,
and, and I,
yes.
I went to Oberlin, and we were required. And if my oboe teacher didn't see me there, because he went, he'd say,
Yeah.
"Where were you?" You had to have a pretty damn good excuse, that you weren't at a concert, particularly to hear other oboe players, but just any kind of a concert, whether it was a Cleveland Symphony or a visiting string quartet, whatever it was. Uh, and all the teachers there insisted on that. I mean, that was something that permeated the whole conservatory, was that kind of attitude. You went to concerts, you not only to support your colleagues, but to learn. And
Yeah,
as a result, my God, I heard all kinds of music.
yeah,
But
yeah,
when I think of outstanding composers, you look at Bartok, Rachmaninoff, very wonderful performers. They are all
yes,
first-rate
yes,
performers.
yes,
Hindemith is another one,
yeah,
and so on and so forth. There are many examples, and uh, and I think that's important for people who want to be a composer. You need to be a performer too, of some kind.
yes,
And
yes.
I've never understood people that just started out composing and never played an instrument. And there are some folks like that, but I learned as much about composition playing the oboe as anything.
Exactly. That's
So
exactly it. Yeah,
and
and
play,
yeah,
just playing all kinds of music, whether it was atonal music or late romantic music or Baroque music. I mean, there was something to be learned with every piece that you learned or heard or studied, whatever. And
right.
so,
Yeah,
and I think that's important to try to convey that to any student you work with. Is it's you've entered a very special world, a sound world, and you've got to find out that sounds can be put together in many different ways. And I mean,
Yes.
today I was just on a CMS Zoom and they're talking about AI in music and what's happening there. And I'll tell you, it's a whole nother world out there of
Yeah.
thing. And it doesn't, and then the other issues that go along with that too, the copyright and all
Yeah.
that. I don't need to get off the track here, but
Yeah.
AI is going to open up a whole nother world. And it's something we're all going to have to cope with that and learn from
Yes.
it. And it doesn't
Yeah.
mean that it'll take over, but use it as another tool. And just
Right.
like I had to learn how to copy music on a computer. It was just
Yeah.
another tool to master. And
Right. Right.
after many years of onion skins and ink.
Yeah,
And
that's right.
and
Yeah.
so it goes. But
Yeah.
no, I think what you've outlined is a wonderful time. I mean, having all those experiences and to meet composers and have, you know, all different points of view. Because I think that's terribly important. And if you get students, you know, from the pop world or pop music thing, you got to try to convey to them that there are things to be learned from the classical side of things too, that'll make them much better. And if you look at some of the outstanding pop people over the years, I mean, people like Frank Sinatra, he was quite a musician and helped record and subsidize the Alec Wilder recordings. I mean, there's a lot more to him than what most people,
Yes,
and
definitely.
that's just one example.
Yes.
But you got to, I think, mentor that, you know, when you work with young people, and knowing that today, given that they didn't come out of what I came out of, because you know, when I was at Oberlin, we had the only scores we had of Webern were in the library, but there were no recordings. And I remember when
Right.
when the
Yeah.
first complete Webern recordings came out, and that wasn't until in the mid '60s. And
Yeah, right,
so
right.
you know, I mean, and today I think it's, you know, it's incredible. I can just within minutes I can have my hands on a score and a recording
Yeah, we're
between
really,
YouTube and, you know, other sources. So
yeah, I mean, you were really, you know, I do that all the time with students, and I'll even, you know, try to find a rolling score, and we'll sit there. It's huge. It's a great tool actually. And the AI thing, you know, I have not I have not studied a lot what's happening in music with AI, but I know that I need to
yeah,
to
no, I mean, there's
try.
this gentleman today talked about the halftime and pre-show at the Super Bowl and the use of AI with that marching band.
Yeah.
That had AI things. That was some
Oh,
live performers, but there was a lot of other stuff that was
right.
AI used. And
Yeah.
of course, that's what enables them to put on all these
Yeah.
spectaculars, if I can put it that way.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. I let's see, I guess Paul mentions here um the next generation composers who have started with garage band type DAWs and then have grown compositional skills without having a high degree of formal music training or compositional background. Yeah, and I mean, you think about sort of access. What do students have access to? And that drive to compose, they're using what they have. And I mean, those were the students that would enroll in the electronic music class
Mhm.
because they couldn't, right? And they came up with stuff that was really moving, actually, some of it, you know.
Yeah. You know, I had students like that at Evergreen when I was there
Yeah,
at Evergreen State, and
yeah,
a lot of them came in. Some of them didn't read music. They'd done
right.
everything by ear, and it was very challenging to work with them, but to help them
Yeah.
understand that if they'd learned these other additional skills, they could be doing even more.
That's
And
it. Yeah. I'm always trying to tell them if if you just give yourself the time to learn these other schools, all these doors are going to open, that you will have many more, creative possibilities that way. So that's, and I try to tell them too, look, a little child learning what you're learning, it takes years. So you can't expect yourself from today to tomorrow to be able to do this fluently. But if you keep going every day, in 6 months, you're going to look back and you're going to have come a long way. So I know that even I was at a music theory pedagogy conference, and there was I can't remember what his name was, but he was from Eastman. And he was saying that more and more students were coming in, especially voice majors, into Eastman barely reading music. So I think the voice majors can get away with that more. They can learn something by rote, and they can have great instruments and be very musical, but they haven't. And I mean, so it's more common. I'm trying to, when a student comes in and says, I want to major in composition, but they have such low skills, I always encourage them to minor in composition. If they're really, really say they want to major in composition, then say, well, then minor in something else, like learn something else that can be your basis. I know when I was an undergrad and I had, I was really fortunate. My parents didn't want me to study music, and so I had to go where I could get to the school with a bus. So I started at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and they had fabulous faculty. I mean, Yehuda Yanai, I don't know if you know, he was mostly avant-garde, but really, really kind person. And I studied choral arranging with him, believe it or not, like he was teaching, and he was great. And then John Downey was my counterpoint in 20th century music literature. And I did go to him because he liked my counterpoint work. And I said, I really want to be a composer. And he said to me, well, you have a very good mind, but this is being a composer is a very hard career, he said. And I was discouraged with that, but I think he was just trying to be realistic.
Yeah.
So, and that basis of counterpoint, I'm telling you, that stuck with me. And he was also a student of Boulanger. So I was really fortunate. I had, a great piano teacher. My vocal teacher was Yolanda Marculescu, who was a personal friend of Ellie Ameling. She was a big diva in Romania, and she and her husband defected from Romania, like they escaped and came and it ended up in Milwaukee. And so she was this really internationally known art song specialist and took me in like I was like her daughter. So all of those things, I always thought, oh, I should have, studied composition, but I find that I got a much richer background from the way things worked out.
Yeah. Another good thing too about being a performer is it becomes a good source to get your performers when you got a new piece.
Yeah.
All of my early stuff were performed by performing friends, clarinet, flute, violin, whatever it was. Piano was always a tough one. They were too busy learning their repertoire.
Yeah, I know. Well, I always tell my students too, I say, when you start a piece, start with the performance in mind and thinking of the performers and having that perspective. Like I have when I'm writing a piece, I'm writing for the performers. So that is, and I know like with the Boulanger program, that was very much stressed that every composer should also be a performer at some level at least. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And then, and then I find it interesting that it carries over into other disciplines. I kind of studied a little bit more about Oppenheimer, the scientist.
Oh yeah,
And it's very interesting to know how he came up in the world. And it's not that much different than a composer in terms of, learning from mentors and rather than being directly taught, but really learning how to ask questions, how to think critically. And I guess now that I'm the age that I'm in, I just thank a lot of people that I was in a school in high school that I had an English teacher that taught us to be a critical thinker. And boy, you don't realize until many years later that these little simple skills you learn, affect how you approach your profession, no matter what it is, whether you're a scientist or an engineer or whatever. If you have teachers that teach you to think critically, to ask questions and to respond to the questions they ask, to make you think critically, how important that is.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah, I don't even know how long I'm going to keep teaching at PLU. They're hiring a full-time person, and I don't even know if they're going to have need for part-time. And I didn't want to go back to full-time at this point. But I do really like teaching at least a few students because I just find it so stimulating and keeps me thinking about music in a different way. And when I'm trying to explain, yeah, Teresa's nodding. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's a wonderful program at PLU.
Yeah.
Because I know Greg Utes and there's another gentleman, I'm not remembering his name, conducted the orchestra there. He's retired now.
Or no, not Jim Brown. No, I can't remember his name either.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Dr. Powell's, perhaps Ed Powell's.
Oh yes.
Yeah. My daughter went to school there. And been under him
Okay.
for several years. Yeah.
Teresa was going to say something. Teresa, are you still here?
Oh, really? It was really on one of your points pretty far back, but I was just commiserating really. So my education took sort of funny paths too, different from yours, but not at all a linear path to where I am now. And so I ended up going to grad school after I had a career singing opera in Germany. And for various reasons that I won't go into now, it was necessary for me to leave where I was, and I didn't know what to do with myself. So I thought, well, I haven't gone to grad school yet, so so let me see if I can do that. And I got a fellowship to go to the University of Victoria, and that was in vocal performance, which I already had.
Yeah.
But what I really wanted to do was study composition. But I wasn't going to be getting a fellowship in studying composition because I didn't have the background. I mean, they wouldn't look at my resume and think.
Right.
So I got it on something I already had, and that program was kind of lucky because they didn't have a lot of requirements for what I studied there beyond giving concerts and taking voice lessons from the head teacher there. And I did some teaching of lyric diction and stuff. But so I could take whatever music classes I wanted. So I took all composition. And I had always wanted to, like you. I'd always wanted to. And I'd written some things, but I just sort of didn't show them to people and stuff. Anyway, but there, at least at that time, I hope it has changed now. It was a whole lot of pressure to write 12 tone. And, right. Absolutely atonal. And I actually I fought back in ways that were not as diplomatic as they could have been. And so I made to turn people against me as a result. And I don't just blame them for that. I think I could have gone about it better. But at the time I was afraid. It's like, don't make me. It was like, I just really, you really spoke to me. I don't want to do it that way.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't want to do it that way. And so I just sort of was hitting my head against the wall. And one teacher, fumed out of the room because of something I said. And I ended up, sort of not, I didn't exactly have to burn bridges, but didn't handle it the best way I could. But what I ended up doing was I would do whatever the teacher wanted me to do. And then the projects that I really wanted to do, I stopped showing them because I didn't want their input. I didn't want their input. I didn't want the way that they were wanting that project to go.
Right.
The first opera that I wrote, I started there, and I decided not to. I stopped showing it to my teachers, and just worked on the side. And I was still learning things from them. It was still valuable.
Yeah.
But I didn't want their fingers in that particular precious project. So my heart just went out to you when you were talking about that, and I think you've handled things probably with more diplomacy than I managed to, at least at that point in my life.
Well, when I was really young, I think I didn't speak out. I just said, well, I'm going to be a performer then, and then when I got older, I got a little bit more cheeky. So when I was doing my doctorate, I had for one semester, Alex Lubet was on sabbatical, and this other guy comes in and he's trying to impress everybody with how, he was a terrible teacher. He ended up getting fired, but I was so angry that I decided I was going to purposely compose the worst thing I could ever, just like throw stuff down.
Yeah.
And it was a song setting. And I seriously went in front of the class, I put this on the piano and I started playing it. And I'm not kidding. He goes, "Oh, this is just wonderful." So, I just stayed deadpan. I didn't.
Dawn, maybe you're better at it than you knew.
I mean, I have to say after going through that, I have, now I don't have this feeling of anger about it, and I have much more appreciation for it, understanding, and I have used 12-tone rows like that were not, in my music to create certain, especially with, no, I guess I have done it in some instrumental as well, where it's not necessarily recognized because there's a tone underneath it, so it's tonal, but it's still a row that is, repeated. And so, and I think, Teresa, like with you coming from already having had a professional career and then walking into that, I can see how you could, I too might have not been diplomatic.
Well, and I was older, and yeah, I think, I mean, part of it is that you wait that long to do something that you really crave, and you're very protective of it, and scared of what would happen if I let too many people into there, I suppose.
Yes, right. Yeah. Does anybody else have any?
Looks like Jeff does.
Yeah.
Okay.
I just wanted to know who I didn't quite catch the name of the composer who you worked with at El Paso.
Joseph Pacules, and he has passed away.
How do you spell the last name?
I think Pacales.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I just wanted to look him up.
I mean,
Try to
that
find
was
something about him.
I ended up El Paso. It was a very complicated situation, and I was married, and my spouse joined the military, and I needed to, but at first, as we drove into El Paso, it's like, oh my gosh, what have I done? And
I've been there.
but I'm telling you, that was such a culturally rich experience for me. It was so great. I regret that I didn't really learn Spanish because all my friends were bilingual. I just have really fond memories of, and that's where I, finished my undergrad. So, yeah.
I have to comment on 12 tone. I had this piano, my piano studio. I have always had a very large piano studio and have taught composition right from the very first lesson. And so as my students learned different pieces, then they learned how to write in the style of whatever piece it was. And I was also going to school, and I learned about 12 tone. I was always fascinated with Schoenberg, and I learned a little bit more about him and learned about 12 tone. And I thought it was fantastic. This is really cool. And so I played around with it, and I did some strict 12 tone, his style. And I didn't want to stick to anything that was anybody else's. So I changed it around a bit. And it came time for me am I going to teach my piano students this? Yes. And I started out, and even I taught it in a music camp where there were other instruments, and I would start out with the violinists that were beginning violinists and just take 3 tones and on and on and on. And so, but anyway, fast forward to my high school piano students who really got into this 12 tone idea. And my gosh, the pieces they came up with. And at the time, I was the chair for the MTNA competition.
Yeah.
And so, and I sent all these pieces and some of my students to all these pieces to the adjudicator. And I got this scathing message back: who is teaching their students 12 tone music? This is ridiculous. I don't know, but here it is, you judge. And so, yep, I had a winner. And it was this girl who was just strict. She just strictly paid attention to the 12 tone, did it like that. And she, a cute little blue-eyed blonde, most popular kid in school and everything. And she thought this was just a lark to do this. And I insisted that she enter it, and she won. And she called it Feeling Sick, because it was to her, that's what it was. And still to this day, I think that's one of the best pieces I've ever heard. And anyway, I still like it. I do use it a lot and play around with it a lot. And then somebody else mentioned a story of getting back at it. When I finally got to my degree, my composition degree that I'd waited for so long, and took the form and analysis. After a while, you just I got really kind of tired of analyzing other people's music, because I always had. But not the fact of analyzing, because I loved analyzing, but writing a paragraph or an assignment dictated by the professor from the point of view that she wanted. I just kind of rebelled, so that I got back to my room, and I had my digital piano, and I went beep, bop, bop, beep, bop, bop, and I wrote it down, and I thought, I'm going to send it to her. And as I was thinking about it, I said, this is so easy to analyze. So I sent it to her. Anyway, she says, well, that's fine, but what is it? I told her. She said, this is, you shot yourself in the foot here. I said, I know, but I thought I'd send it anyway. Anyway, but the thing is that she wanted me to speak about music the way from her point of view. And I just did not like her point of view. I thought it wasn't a creative point of view at all. And I just couldn't handle it. So
that's the thing, is this kind of balance between intellect and creativity. That's what we're always dealing with, right, as composers, because you can't just ignore intellect.
Right.
There's always in tonal music as well, like we've learned a lot, right? So, but the last the time when I finally said, okay, I'm done, because I kept trying to compose atonal music. While I was in Germany, I'm trying to compose it and I'm just throwing it away. And I was on an airplane flying from Minneapolis to Seattle. And everybody was like doing whatever puzzles on the, and I thought, I always have staff paper with me when I fly. So in case I have an idea. So I thought I'm going to write a 12-tone row and I'm going to start which is not exactly how, anyway, but I take all my staff paper and I start writing this. I'm thinking, this is really crazy, but nobody in this plane knows what I'm doing. And the guy across the aisle from me, he stood up and he looked down, he said, "Are you composing a 12-tone?"
Yep.
And he was a concert pianist named Paul Shaw, and he was at the University of Minnesota, and he was flying to Seattle for some performance. So I just started laughing. I said, "This is just too, like, no one would know that,
Yeah.
Wow.
And
I have a couple of funny stories about that. One was I was writing so much atonal, and and people would say, this is very interesting, but I don't like that. And the more they said I don't like that, the more I loved it, because I wanted to write something nobody could understand. But as time went on, I thought, I want people to like it. I want to do all this, what I call intellectual stuff. I call Bach the intellectual composer, and that's what I grew up on, was counterpoint. So, and I think that basis helped me with 12-tone, with everything else, is I wanted to incorporate a lot of that, but still have some sort of melody or motive that people could go away with, or what. And that was the hard part. I felt was the hardest part, was to get something like that. Writing all this convoluted stuff, that was easy. But the hard part was, and before that, I wrote a lot of church music. I mean, my choruses and all that stuff were sung and on and on and on. So I could write that tonal, but to write the what is it, the classical style, concert style of tonality. But and then when I met Eric, when our first conversation was, he was in science and I was music, and he was a lot more outdoorsy than I was, but we hit on one thing. He took a lot of music appreciation and loved that. Arnold Schoenberg, tone row music, the decaphonic music. We both loved it.
Oh, wow.
Go
figure. Okay.
I don't know, my attitude about this, good music is good music.
Yeah.
And I learned that early on. I mean, one of my first serious compositions was kind of a polytonal piece, and very linearly oriented. And I never looked back. So I just write music. And sometimes it has involved a row, sometimes it's quasi-atonal or pantonal. And, I just don't like to get caught up in this, good and bad music.
Yeah.
Because when I later learned, music of Schoenberg and Webern and Berg, and found, wonderful experiences there. And to this day, there's a couple of Schoenberg things I like, Erwartung, and the scene for a music for a film scene, and the variations, and the 5 pieces for orchestra. I mean, they're masterpieces. Mm-hmm. And I don't worry about whether there's a tonal center or something. I just immerse myself in the musical experience. And I remember I had a colleague, music ed colleague in Oberlin, and I remember him coming back at night saying how he had taught tone rows to his first grade kids in class. And they didn't know the difference.
Right.
And he made the point, we learn these prejudices from teachers, And I think it's unfortunate rather than just saying, hey, here's a nice piece of music, listen to it and enjoy it. And then, maybe later find out what it consists of. And I don't know. I just have a whole different attitude about this.
Well, I didn't want to put across the idea of black and white or good and bad either. It had more to do with what I was trying to create at the time and the ways that my professors,
Mhm.
I didn't feel they were going to be helping me with that.
Mhm.
What I've gravitated towards, since I'm really interested in music for the theater, I'm really, in operas and in music that at least is atmospheric around human interaction and emotion. And so what I find just happening with what I write is if the emotional atmosphere is, if the people are in harmony, then I write harmonic music. And if they are not to one degree or another, then it heads more, it becomes less and less tonal. And for me, that just turns, it's not like I have a program for that. It's just that that's what I end up hearing. And
Yeah.
so since music for the theater and music to be sung, music that goes with text is my strongest interest. It just seems to be turning out that way, and it feels pretty satisfying so far.
Yeah, that's the thing, is that there are these parts of life that are, not, well, I don't say not melodic because 12-tone music can be very melodic, right? But the sort of the associations and the atmosphere, sometimes you can't create it with tonal music. Sometimes what you really
Right.
want, you
Right.
need that that there's not a center.
Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. Yeah.
So yeah.
Paul has something.
All I'm gonna have to be pulling out pretty soon. I want to just thank Liz and Dawn for you presenting, and Liz for hosting this. I'm glad the technology things got sorted out. It's very good to be here. This is my first Cascadia Composer Forum event, and
Oh,
Welcome.
I like what I'm seeing. I like the people here. I look forward to more in the future.
oh,
So
great.
again, Liz, thanks for bailing me out at the last minute there. It worked out well.
Thank you. That's no problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming, Paul.
Yeah. Thanks.
Bye, Paul.
Yeah.
And
Well, it's already almost 9, so